The blood-soaked bandage around Quinn Pearson's torso told a story of desperation as he stumbled through the wooden doorway of Kathleen Avery's cabin on the outskirts of Pahrump, Nevada Territory. 1873, a man seeking salvation from a woman the town had labeled a witch. Kathleen's hands froze over her collection of herbs as the wounded stranger collapsed against her doorframe. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across her small cabin, illuminating the dried plants hanging from the ceiling and the countless glass bottles lining her shelves. They said, in town, that you could heal. Quinn managed between labored breaths, clutching his side where blood seeped through his fingers. His tall frame, now hunched in pain, still cut an impressive figure despite his weakened state. A week's worth of stubble covered his jawline, and his hazel eyes, though clouded with pain, held a determined glint. Kathleen approached cautiously. At 27, she'd learned that strangers often brought trouble, especially to women who lived alone and practiced the healing arts her grandmother had taught her. "Who sent you?" she asked, her voice measured as she assessed his condition. The wound looked serious, likely a bullet or knife that had torn deep into his flesh. "No one," Quinn grimaced, sliding down until he sat on her floor. "Overheard. Men talking in the saloon about the witch outside town who could heal anything." Kathleen stiffened. "And you thought you'd come see for yourself, perhaps bring back proof of my wickedness." The accusation was a familiar burden. 3 years in Pahrump had taught her how quickly fear turned to hatred. "No, madam." Quinn's eyes locked with hers. "They say you're a witch for your healing. Well then." He attempted a smile that turned into a wince. "Then heal me too." Something in his direct gaze made Kathleen pause. Unlike the fearful or hostile looks she usually received, his eyes held only pain and a strange sort of trust. "I'm no witch," she said firmly, already moving to gather her supplies. "But I do know how to treat a wound. How did this happen?" Disagreement. "Over cards," Quinn managed as she helped him to her small bed in the corner of the one-room cabin. "Fellow didn't appreciate my straight flush." Despite herself, Kathleen's lips twitched. "So you're a gambling man with enemies. That hardly makes you a wise choice of patient." "Never claimed to be wise, madam, just desperate." His breathing was becoming more labored, his face ashen. Kathleen worked quickly, cutting away his blood-soaked shirt to reveal a deep gash along his side. "This needs cleaning and stitching. It will hurt." Quinn nodded. "Do what you must." She cleaned the wound with a strong herbal solution that made him hiss through clenched teeth. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she prepared a needle and thread. "You've done this before," Quinn observed, watching her through pain-hazed eyes. "Many times, though most of my patients have 4 legs." She gestured toward the window where a small barn stood nearby. "The townsfolk bring their animals to me when they're desperate enough. They'll trust a witch with their livestock but not their families." As she began stitching, Quinn gripped the edges of the bed but remained silent. The discipline impressed her. Most men would be cursing or passed out by now. "What's your name, Cowboy?" she asked, partly to distract him. "Quinn Pearson," he managed. "And you, Kathleen Avery?" "Not Witch of Pahrump." He attempted humor through gritted teeth, her hands stilled for a moment. "That's what they call me, yes, among other things." "How did you learn all this?" Quinn asked as she continued her work. "My grandmother was a healer. She taught me everything which plants heal, which harm, how to set bones and stitch wounds." Kathleen tied off another neat stitch. "When she died, I continued her work. Simple as that." "Nothing simple about it," Quinn murmured, his eyes following her movements. "Where I come from, they'd call it a gift." Kathleen gave him a measuring look. "And where exactly is that?" "All over. Texas originally. Been drifting since the war ended." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Many men had returned from the Civil War unable to settle, carrying invisible wounds alongside their visible ones. As she finished the stitches and applied a poultice of herbs to the wound, Quinn's breathing steadied. "You need rest now," she instructed. "The wound's clean, but infection is still a risk." Quinn attempted to sit up. "I should get back to town." Kathleen pressed him gently back down. "The only place you're going is to sleep, Mr. Pearson, unless you'd like your insides to become your outsides again." A weak chuckle escaped him. "You make a persuasive argument." His eyes were already closing, the pain and blood loss taking their toll. Kathleen watched him drift to sleep, wondering what she'd done by allowing this stranger into her home. The townspeople already distrusted her harboring a wounded gunslinger would only feed their suspicions. Outside, the desert wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in her cabin walls. Night was approaching, bringing with it the bitter cold of the Nevada desert. Kathleen stoked her small stove and settled into her rocking chair, prepared for a long vigil beside her unexpected patient. She didn't know then how this wounded cowboy would change everything, that the healing she offered him would set in motion events that would either save them both or destroy everything she'd built. She only knew that for the first time in years, she'd allowed someone to cross the careful boundary she'd drawn between herself and the people of Pahrump. Morning light filtered through the small windows of Kathleen's cabin, casting golden rectangles across the plank floor. Quinn stirred, consciousness returning with the sharp reminder of pain in his side. He opened his eyes to find Kathleen already awake, grinding something in a stone mortar at her table. "You're still alive," she observed without looking up. "That's promising." Quinn attempted to shift into a sitting position, wincing at the pull of the stitches. "Thanks to you." Now she glanced his way, her expression guarded. "How does it feel?" "Like I've been kicked by a mule, but I'll manage." He looked down at the neat bandage wrapped around his torso. "You do good work, Miss Avery." "Kathleen," she corrected, approaching with a cup of strong-smelling liquid. "Drink this. It will help with the pain and prevent fever." Quinn sniffed the concoction warily. "Smells like a swamp." "It's willow bark, echinacea, and a few other things you don't need to worry about." She raised an eyebrow. "Unless you'd prefer to suffer nobly." With a grimace, Quinn downed the bitter mixture. "If this turns me into a toad, I'm holding you personally responsible." A smile briefly touched her lips. "Contrary to town rumor, I haven't transformed anyone yet." She took the empty cup. "Are you hungry?" As if in answer, his stomach growled loudly. Kathleen moved to her small stove where a pot of something bubbled. "It's just venison stew, nothing fancy." "After 3 days of hardtack and jerky, it'll taste like heaven." Quinn watched as she ladled the stew into a wooden bowl. There was an efficient grace to her movements, nothing wasted. "How long have you lived out here alone?" he asked as she handed him the steaming bowl. Kathleen hesitated before answering. 3 years in this cabin. Before that, I traveled with my grandmother after my parents died. No husband, family, just me." Her tone discouraged further questions on the subject. "And what about you, Mr. Pearson? What brings a Texas man to Pahrump beyond a card game gone wrong?" Quinn blew on a spoonful of stew before answering. "I'm heading to California. Heard there's good ranching land available in the northern part. Thought I'd try my hand at something more permanent than drifting." He tasted the stew, eyes widening in appreciation. "This is excellent. Thank you." Kathleen sat in her rocking chair, studying him. "So you were just passing through when you got into trouble. That's about the size of it." Quinn took another spoonful. "Though the trouble found me more than I found it. Man accused me of cheating, pulled a knife when I won fair and square." "And where is this man now?" Quinn's expression sobered. "Nursing a broken wrist and wounded pride, I expect. I didn't kill him, if that's what you're asking." Relief flickered across Kathleen's face. "That's good. Sheriff Layton takes a dim view of killing, justified or not, and he's already suspicious of outsiders." "Including you?" Quinn asked perceptively. Kathleen's hands tightened on the arms of her rocker. "Especially me." The sheriff's wife was expecting their first child last year. There were complications. Her voice grew quiet. "They called for me too late. I couldn't save either of them." Understanding dawned in Quinn's eyes. "And he blamed you. People need someone to blame when tragedy strikes." "A woman living alone who works with herbs and doesn't attend church. I was an easy target." She stood abruptly. "You should rest. I need to tend my garden." Quinn watched her leave, noting the stiff set of her shoulders. There was more to Kathleen Avery's story than she was telling, but he wouldn't press. Everyone had parts of themselves they kept hidden. He certainly did. He finished his stew, and despite his intention to stay awake, found his eyes growing heavy. Whatever she'd given him for pain was working effectively, pulling him back toward sleep. His last conscious thought was that for a woman accused of witchcraft, Kathleen Avery seemed remarkably human and unexpectedly kind. Outside, Kathleen knelt in her garden, pulling weeds with perhaps more force than necessary. The stranger's questions had stirred memories she preferred to keep buried. Sheriff Layton's grief-stricken face as he carried his wife's body from their home. The whispers that began after that night spreading through town like wildfire. Witch, sorceress, devil's handmaiden, words had turned to actions. Customers stopped coming except in secret. Windows broken in the night, dead animals left on her doorstep, if not for old Mrs. Pearson, who still brought her eggs in exchange for remedies for her arthritis, and a few other brave souls who visited under cover of darkness. Kathleen might have starved that first year. She looked up at the mountains in the distance, wondering for the 100th time if she should have moved on. But this land had been her grandmother's dream, a place where they could finally settle after years of wandering, following her grandmother's reputation as a healer from town to town. "I promised you I'd make a home here, Grandma," she whispered. "I'm trying." The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled her from her thoughts. Kathleen stood quickly, brushing dirt from her skirts as a rider came into view. Her heart sank as she recognized the weathered face beneath the wide-brimmed hat, Sheriff Layton. He reined his horse to a stop a few yards from her garden. "Miss Avery," he greeted coldly. "Sheriff." She kept her voice neutral. "What brings you out this way? Had reports of a wounded man heading in this direction yesterday." His eyes scanned her property. "Wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Kathleen considered lying but decided against it. The sheriff would search her cabin with or without permission if he was determined enough. "Yes, a man came to me injured. I treated his wound. This man have a name." Layton's hand rested casually near his holstered pistol. "Quinn Pearson. He said he was passing through to California." The sheriff's expression hardened. "Pearson's wanted for questioning about a knife fight in town. When he's well enough to travel, you send him my way." "He will need several days to recover," Kathleen replied. "The wound was deep." 3 days, Layton said flatly. "Then I'm coming back for him, ready or not. The wound could reopen. That'll be his problem, not yours." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Unless you've taken a special interest in this one, Miss Avery." Kathleen felt heat rise to her cheeks but kept her expression impassive. "I treat anyone who needs help, Sheriff. You know that." "Yes, I do know that." His voice turned bitter. "Just like I know sometimes your help isn't enough, is it?" The barb struck its target, but Kathleen refused to show it. "Will there be anything else, Sheriff?" Layton studied her for a moment longer before turning his horse. 3 days, Miss Avery, not a day more." She watched him ride away, anxiety settling in her stomach. Quinn's wound was serious. Moving him too soon could be dangerous. But arguing with Leighton would only make matters worse. When she returned to the cabin, she found Quinn awake, sitting on the edge of the bed. "The sheriff's looking for you," she said without preamble. Quinn nodded. "I heard. Thin walls. You have 3 days before he comes back. Then I'd best be gone in 2. He attempted to stand, swaying slightly. Kathleen moved quickly to steady him. "You're in no condition to travel." "Wouldn't be the first time I've ridden wounded." His hand closed over hers where it rested on his arm. "But I won't bring more trouble to your door, Miss Avery." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, of what it meant to be alone and hunted. "I'm already neck-deep in trouble," Kathleen said softly. "Has been that way for some time. One more day won't make much difference." Quinn's gaze held hers. "Why are you helping me?" The question caught her off guard with its directness. "Because you needed it," she answered simply. "Because that's what I do. Even knowing it makes people call you a witch." Kathleen's laugh held no humor. "They'd call me that regardless. At least this way I'm living up to the title." Quinn's hand tightened slightly on hers. "Well, witch or not, I'm in your debt." She pulled her hand away, uncomfortable with the warmth his touch stirred. "Let's get you back to bed. You need rest if you're planning on leaving soon." As she helped him lie back down, she couldn't help noticing the lean strength of him, the careful way he moved to avoid straining his wound. There was a gentleness to him that belied his rugged appearance, a consideration in how he leaned on her, careful not to put too much of his weight on her smaller frame. "Tell me about California," she said as she adjusted his pillows. "What are you hoping to find there?" Quinn settled back, seeming grateful for the change of subject. "Land of my own. A fresh start." His eyes took on a distant look. "My family had a ranch in Texas before the war, lost it all when I was away fighting. When I came back, there was nothing left but ashes and memories." "I'm sorry," Kathleen said softly. He shrugged. "Been 10 years now, long enough to stop looking back and start looking forward." A smile touched his lips. "They say in California a man can reinvent himself, become whatever he sets his mind to. Is that what you want, to become someone else?" Quinn considered this. "Not someone else, just more than what I've been, more than a drifter with a deck of cards and a fast draw." Kathleen nodded, understanding better than he knew. "Rest now, we can talk more later." As she turned to leave, Quinn caught her wrist. "Thank you, Kathleen. Not just for the doctoring, but for not turning me away." The sincerity in his voice touched something long dormant inside her. "You're welcome, Quinn." Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain by nightfall. Kathleen found herself hoping the weather would delay the sheriff's return, giving Quinn more time to heal and perhaps, though she wouldn't admit it even to herself, giving her more time with the first person in years who'd looked at her without fear or contempt. Rain pattered against the cabin roof as evening descended, bringing with it a damp chill that seeped through the cabin walls. Kathleen added another log to the stove, watching as sparks rose up the chimney pipe. Behind her, Quinn sat at her small table, a blanket around his shoulders, sipping a cup of herb tea. "Storm's setting in," she observed, closing the stove door. "Might last a couple of days from the look of those clouds." "Good news for me, bad news for the sheriff," Quinn replied, a hint of satisfaction in his tone. He shifted in his seat, grimacing slightly. "Though I still aim to be gone before he returns." Kathleen studied him critically. "Your color's better. How's the pain? Manageable?" He took another sip of tea. "Whatever you put in this helps," she nodded, satisfied. "It should. It's a blend my grandmother created for pain. The ingredients aren't easy to come by in these parts." "Your grandmother sounds like a remarkable woman." A fond smile touched Kathleen's lips. She was. Traveled all over the country learning from anyone who would teach her native healers, Mexican curanderas, Chinese herbalists. She believed all healing traditions had value, regardless of where they came from. Is that what got her labeled a witch too? Quinn asked perceptively. Among other things. Kathleen sat across from him. She was unconventional, refused to pretend she was less than she was to make others comfortable. She paid a price for it, we both did. How so? Kathleen's fingers traced patterns on the wooden tabletop. We never stayed anywhere long. As soon as people realized what she could do, they'd come seeking miracles. When she couldn't provide them or when her methods seemed too strange, the whispers would start. She looked up at him. You've seen how it goes. First fear, then accusations. Quinn nodded solemnly. People fear what they don't understand, and they hate what they fear. Kathleen sighed. Still, she helped hundreds of people in her lifetime. I like to think that mattered more than the ugly names they called her. Thunder rolled overhead and the rain intensified, drumming against the cabin with renewed force. What about your parents? Quinn asked. You mentioned they died. Kathleen's expression closed. Influenza when I was 16. My grandmother raised me after that. Quinn sensed her reluctance to discuss it further and changed the subject. How did you end up in Pahrump, of all places? Grandmother had a vision. Kathleen smiled at his raised eyebrow. Yes, that kind of vision. She said she saw a place where mountains meet desert, where healing waters run beneath the earth. We were in California at the time, and she insisted we head east. When we found the springs near here, she knew this was the place. There are springs here, hidden ones, yes. The local Paiute people have known about them for generations. She hesitated, then added, I could show you when you're stronger, before you leave. The offer surprised them both. Kathleen rarely shared her grandmother's special places with anyone. Quinn seemed to understand the significance. I'd like that. A comfortable silence settled between them as the storm raged outside. Kathleen found herself studying Quinn's features in the lamplight, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the way his hazel eyes caught the light when he smiled. He was handsome in a weathered way, his face telling the story of years spent under open skies. What? He asked, catching her gaze. Kathleen flushed slightly. Just checking your color. Healer's habit. His lips quirked in a half-smile that suggested he didn't entirely believe her. And what's your professional assessment? That you're recovering well but still need rest. She stood, gathering their empty cups. Which means you should get back to bed. Quinn rose carefully, keeping the blanket around his shoulders. Yes, madam. As he made his way back to the bed, Kathleen noticed his limp was less pronounced than earlier. He was healing quickly, which meant he would soon be gone from her life as suddenly as he had entered it. The thought brought an unexpected pang of regret. Kathleen. Quinn's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He had paused beside the bed, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Yes. Why did you stay here? After your grandmother died, you could have gone anywhere, started fresh where no one knew you. The question struck at the heart of something she rarely examined. This was her dream, Kathleen answered simply, to build something permanent, a place where people could come for healing. She looked around the small cabin with its hanging herbs and shelves of remedies. I couldn't abandon that. Even though the people here treat you poorly, not all of them. She thought of the handful who still sought her help in secret. And things change. People change given time. Quinn regarded her thoughtfully. You have more faith in human nature than I do. Perhaps. Kathleen turned down the lamp. Or maybe I'm just stubborn. His low chuckle followed her as she moved toward her pallet near the stove. Stubborn is good. Stubborn keeps you going when sense says quit. Is that what you're doing, heading to California, being stubborn, maybe? In the dim light, she could just make out his smile. Or maybe I'm finally finding my sense. Kathleen settled onto her pallet, pulling a quilt around her. "Either way, I hope you find what you're looking for. Thank you." His voice was soft in the darkness. "Good night, Kathleen." "Good night, Quinn." Outside, the storm continued unabated, but within the cabin, a different kind of weather was brewing, one that neither of them had anticipated when Quinn first stumbled through her door. The rain continued through the night and into the next day, turning the ground around the cabin into mud and making the small creek that ran nearby swell to twice its normal size. By midday, Kathleen was growing restless, unaccustomed to being confined indoors with company. Quinn seemed to sense her discomfort. "I can make myself scarce if you have things to do," he offered, looking up from the book he'd been reading, one of the few Kathleen owned, a worn copy of Paradise Lost. "It's not that." Kathleen stood at the window, watching the rain. "I usually gather herbs this time of year. If the rain continues much longer, I'll miss the peak harvest for some of them." Quinn closed the book. "Is there anything I could help with? Inside work, maybe?" Kathleen considered this. "Actually, yes. I need to prepare more of that pain remedy. If you're feeling up to it, you could help me grind the dried herbs." Soon they were seated at the table, Kathleen showing Quinn how to use the mortar and pestle to grind the brittle leaves to the right consistency. "Not too fine," she instructed. "We want it coarse enough to release its oils slowly when steeped." Quinn's large hands looked out of place with the delicate work, but he was surprisingly deft. "My mother used to make medicines," he explained when Kathleen commented on his skill. "Nothing as sophisticated as yours, but she knew her way around a herb garden." "Was she the one who taught you to read?" Kathleen nodded toward the book. "She was." Pride tinged his voice. "Insisted all her children be educated, even though we lived miles from the nearest school. Taught us herself until we were old enough to make the ride." "How many siblings do you have?" A shadow crossed his face. "Had 2 brothers, both younger. Lost one to fever when he was just a boy. The other died at Shiloh fighting for the Confederacy." "I'm sorry." Kathleen's hand briefly touched his. "The war took so much from so many." Quinn nodded, continuing his grinding. "What about you? Any siblings?" "Just me." Kathleen measured dried roots into a small scale. "My mother had difficulties carrying children. I was the only one who survived." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of the pestle against mortar and the rain on the roof creating a soothing backdrop. "This is nice," Quinn said after a time. "Working together like this." Kathleen glanced up, meeting his gaze. "Yes, it is. I usually work alone." "Don't you get lonely out here?" The question was innocent, but it touched on a vulnerability Kathleen rarely acknowledged. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I have my garden, my work, the animals I tend." "No friends in town?" Kathleen gave a wry smile. "Witches don't tend to have many friends, Quinn." His expression sobered. "Right. I forget sometimes that's how they see you." "How do you see me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Quinn set down the mortar and pestle, giving her his full attention. "I see a skilled healer who saved my life. A woman with courage enough to live by her convictions, despite what it costs her." His eyes held hers. "I see someone remarkable, Kathleen Avery." The sincerity in his voice made her heart quicken. No one had spoken to her that way in years, like she was worthy of admiration rather than suspicion. "You hardly know me," she said, looking away. "I know enough." His hand covered hers where it rested on the table. "I know that in a world that's shown me mostly cruelty and indifference these past years, you offered kindness to a stranger who had nothing to give in return." Kathleen's throat tightened with emotion she wasn't prepared for. "You should rest," she said, withdrawing her hand. "You're still healing." Quinn accepted the deflection with grace. "As the healer commands." As he returned to the bed, Kathleen busied herself with organizing the herbs they'd prepared, trying to calm her racing heart. This attraction to Quinn was dangerous not just because he would soon leave, but because caring for anyone made her vulnerable in a town already looking for reasons to condemn her. And yet, as she watched him settle onto the bed with her book, she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her at the sight of him in her home, as if he belonged there. The rain tapered off that evening, leaving behind a world washed clean, and the scent of wet sage drifting through the open window. Kathleen had just finished preparing supper when a knock at the door startled them both. Quinn tensed, reaching instinctively for a weapon he wasn't carrying. Kathleen motioned for him to stay quiet as she approached the door. "Who is it?" she called. "It's Sarah Peterson, Miss Avery," came a young woman's voice. "Ma sent me with eggs and to fetch that tonic for her joints. Said the rain would make them act up something fierce." Kathleen relaxed, opening the door to reveal a girl of about 18, clutching a basket covered with a cloth. Sarah's eyes widened when she spotted Quinn sitting at the table. "Oh, I didn't know you had company." Her gaze darted between them, uncertainty written across her face. "Mr. Pearson is a patient," Kathleen explained, taking the basket. "Please come in, Sarah. I have your mother's medicine ready." The girl hesitated before stepping inside, keeping a wary distance from Quinn. He nodded politely to her but remained seated, aware that his presence was making her uncomfortable. "How is your mother?" Kathleen asked, retrieving a small bottle from her shelf. "About the same. Pa says the dampness makes her hands swell so bad she can hardly cook." Sarah kept her voice low as though sharing a secret. "He doesn't know she still comes to you. Says we should be using the new doctor in town instead." "Dr. Merrill," Kathleen raised an eyebrow. "And what does your mother think of that idea?" Sarah smiled slightly. "Says his medicines taste worse than yours and cost 3 times as much." Kathleen laughed, handing the bottle to Sarah. "2 drops in tea morning and night. It should help with the swelling." As Sarah turned to leave, her curiosity got the better of her. "Are you the man Sheriff Layton's looking for?" she blurted out, addressing Quinn directly. Quinn met her gaze steadily. "I am. They're saying in town you killed a man." "That's not true," Kathleen interjected firmly. "Mr. Pearson defended himself against someone who attacked him. He hurt no one severely." Sarah looked uncertain. "Sheriff's been asking all over for you, said you're a dangerous man." "The sheriff is mistaken," Quinn said calmly. "But I understand his caution. It's his job to protect the town." Sarah studied him for a moment longer, then turned to Kathleen. "Will you be at the Founders' Day celebration next week? Ma says you should come. Show people you're not." She stopped abruptly, flushing. "A witch," Kathleen supplied with a sad smile. "I don't think my presence would improve the festivities, Sarah, but thank your mother for the invitation." After Sarah left, Quinn turned to Kathleen. "What's this Founders' Day? Annual celebration marking the town's founding. There's dancing, food, games for the children." Kathleen stirred the stew she'd prepared. "I've never attended." "Why not?" She gave him a pointed look. "You heard Sarah. My presence would only make people uncomfortable. Or it might help them see you're just a normal woman, not some mysterious witch in the woods." "Is that what you think I should do? Parade myself in town to prove I'm harmless?" Kathleen's voice held an edge. Quinn shook his head. "I think hiding away only feeds their fear, but it's your choice, of course." They ate supper in thoughtful silence. Afterward, Quinn insisted on helping with the dishes despite Kathleen's protests that he should rest. "I've been resting for 2 days," he said, taking a plate from her hands. "A little activity will do me good." Standing beside him at the wash basin, Kathleen was acutely aware of his proximity, the clean scent of the soap she'd given him earlier, the way his shirt sleeve occasionally brushed against her arm. He'd shaved that morning with a razor she'd provided, revealing a strong jawline previously hidden by stubble. "What will you do," she asked suddenly, "if the sheriff comes looking for you before you're well enough to travel?" Quinn's hand stilled in the soapy water. "Face him, I suppose. Explain what happened. And if he doesn't believe you, then I'll deal with that when it comes." He glanced at her. "I won't bring trouble to your door, Kathleen. If it looks like things might go badly, I'll leave. Your wound will heal." His expression softened. "I appreciate your concern, but I've survived worse." Kathleen wanted to argue but knew he was right. Quinn Pearson was a grown man who had been taking care of himself long before he stumbled into her life. Still, the thought of him facing the sheriff's prejudice with a half-healed wound troubled her. "I could go with you," she offered. "Speak on your behalf." Quinn's surprise was evident. "You do that, even knowing how the town feels about you." "I'm not afraid of them, Quinn." "No, I don't suppose you are." He studied her with newfound respect. "But I can't let you put yourself at risk for me. This is my problem to solve." Kathleen opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. His protective instinct was misplaced, but came from genuine concern. "Well, with luck, the sheriff will be delayed by the muddy roads. Give you another day or two to recover." Later, as they sat by the stove with cups of tea, Quinn asked about the springs she'd mentioned the previous night. "They're about half a mile from here," Kathleen explained. "Hidden in a small canyon. The Paiute believe the waters have healing properties." "You believe that?" "I believe there's something special about them," she answered carefully. "The water contains minerals that can ease certain ailments, but more than that." She hesitated. "It's a peaceful place. Grandmother said some locations hold natural power. They help the body remember how to heal itself." Rather than the skepticism she expected, Quinn nodded thoughtfully. "I've felt that. Certain places have a presence to them." "Exactly." Kathleen smiled, pleased by his understanding. "If the ground dries enough tomorrow, perhaps we could visit them. The walk would do your injury good, get the blood flowing properly." "I'd like that." As the evening deepened, Kathleen found herself reluctant to end their conversation. Quinn told stories of his travels, the characters he'd met, the landscapes he'd crossed. He described California as he'd heard it described, with its towering redwoods and valleys lush with possibility. "You paint quite a picture," Kathleen said, stifling a yawn. "I can see why you're drawn there." Quinn's expression grew thoughtful. "When I was a boy, I never imagined leaving Texas. Thought I'd live my whole life on the family ranch, maybe expand it someday for my own children." He stared into his empty cup. "Funny how life takes unexpected turns." "Indeed." Kathleen's thoughts drifted to her own unexpected journey, how she'd planned to travel with her grandmother, learning from healers around the country, only to find herself rooted to this small cabin, an outsider in a community that feared her. "You ever think of leaving?" Quinn asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Starting fresh somewhere new?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I remember all the work we put into this place. The garden with plants my grandmother and I brought from 100 different places. The people who still need me, even if they won't admit it publicly." She shook her head. "This is home now, for better or worse." Quinn reached across the small space between them, taking her hand in his. The gesture was gentle, but sent a current through her that had nothing to do with healing energy. "You're a brave woman, Kathleen Avery." Their eyes met and held, and for a moment, Kathleen allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where she wasn't alone, where this man with kind eyes and gentle hands remained by her side. The thought was as frightening as it was alluring. "We should sleep," she said softly, withdrawing her hand. "Tomorrow will be a busy day if we're to visit the springs." As she prepared for bed, Kathleen wondered if she was making a terrible mistake, opening herself to feelings for a man who would soon ride away to his California dreams. But beneath that worry lay a deeper truth she was only beginning to acknowledge. After years of isolation, the connection she felt with Quinn had awakened something she'd thought long dormant: hope. Dawn broke clear and bright, the storm clouds having moved eastward during the night. Kathleen rose early, stepping outside to assess the condition of the paths. The ground was still damp, but no longer muddy passable enough for their planned excursion to the springs. When she returned inside, she found Quinn already awake, attempting to stretch his injured side with a series of careful movements. "Testing your limits?" she asked, filling the kettle for morning coffee. "Seeing what's possible." He grimaced slightly as he raised his arm. "I'll need to be able to ride soon." The reminder of his imminent departure cast a shadow over her morning brightness, but Kathleen kept her expression neutral. "Let me check your wound first. If it looks clean, we can try the springs today. The minerals might help with the healing." After breakfast, she unwrapped his bandage to examine the stitched gash. The skin around it was still red but showed no signs of infection. The stitches had held well, and new pink flesh was already forming at the edges. "You heal quickly," she observed, applying a fresh salve. "That's good." "Strong constitution." Quinn watched her work. "My mother used to say I was too stubborn to stay hurt long." Kathleen smiled, rewrapping the wound with clean bandages. "Stubbornness has its uses." They set out mid-morning, Quinn wearing a spare shirt of his that Kathleen had washed and mended. He moved carefully but with increasing confidence, and by the time they reached the small canyon that concealed the springs, his breathing was only slightly labored. "It's just ahead," Kathleen said, leading him along a narrow path between rocky outcroppings. "Around this bend." The path opened suddenly into a secluded grotto where clear water bubbled up from the earth, forming a series of small pools before flowing away as a stream. Ancient petroglyphs decorated some of the surrounding rocks, and unusual plants grew in the moist microclimate created by the springs. Quinn stopped, taking in the unexpected oasis. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "My grandmother called it the breath of the earth," Kathleen explained, moving toward the largest pool. "The water stays warm year-round. In winter, steam rises from it even when snow covers the ground." She knelt beside the pool, dipping her fingers into the clear water. "The Paiute have used these waters for healing for generations. They granted my grandmother permission to come here after she helped their chief's son recover from a fever that nearly took him." Quinn approached, lowering himself carefully to sit on a flat rock near the water. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the pool. At Kathleen's nod, he submerged his hand, surprise crossing his face at the pleasant warmth. "It feels different, almost silky." "That's the minerals. They can help with inflammation and pain." Kathleen hesitated, then added, "If you're willing, soaking your wound directly might speed healing." Quinn raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting I strip down and take a bath, Miss Avery?" A blush crept up Kathleen's cheeks. "You could just remove your shirt and sit at the edge. The water needs direct contact with the wound to be most effective." With a smile that suggested he was enjoying her discomfort more than he should, Quinn unbuttoned his shirt. "As the healer recommends." Kathleen busied herself examining some nearby plants as he eased into position at the pool's edge, unwrapping his own bandage with practiced movements. When she glanced back, he had settled with his injured side submerged in the warm water, his expression relaxed. "This feels remarkable," he admitted, "like nothing I've experienced before." Kathleen returned to kneel beside the pool, a small distance from him. "The waters have unique properties. Grandmother believed they help the body remember its natural state of health." Quinn's eyes were closed, his face turned up to catch the dappled sunlight filtering through the canyon walls. With his guard down, he looked younger, the lines of worry and wariness smoothed away. "Kathleen." "Yes. Thank you for sharing this place with me." His eyes opened, finding hers. "I know it's special to you." The sincerity in his gaze made her heart flutter. "You're welcome." They remained by the springs for over an hour, Quinn soaking his wound while Kathleen gathered some of the rare plants that grew only in this protected microclimate. The intimacy of the setting, the gurgle of water, the isolation from the outside world, Quinn's state of partial undress created a charged atmosphere between them that Kathleen both welcomed and feared. As they prepared to return to the cabin, Quinn rebandaging his side with the fresh dressings Kathleen had brought, he asked a question that caught her by surprise. "Have you ever thought of coming to California?" Kathleen's hand stilled where she was packing her gathered plants. "California. It's not so different from here in parts. You could establish a new healing practice without the burden of suspicion you carry here." His eyes met hers. "Just a thought. Are you?" Kathleen searched his face. "Are you inviting me to come with you?" Quinn's expression turned serious. "I might be, if that's something you'd consider." The suggestion sent a cascade of emotions through her: hope, fear, excitement, doubt. "We hardly know each other, Quinn. I know you saved my life. I know you're kind and skilled and braver than most men I've met." He stepped closer. "I know that when I look at you, I see someone I'd like to know better. Much better." Kathleen's breath caught. No man had spoken to her this way in years, not since before the whispers of witchcraft began. "You're leaving soon," she said softly. "Perhaps these feelings are just gratitude for the care I've provided." "It's more than that." Quinn's voice was firm. "I've been grateful to people before without wanting to build a future with them." The word future hung between them, weighty with possibility. I need time to think," Kathleen managed, both thrilled and terrified by what he was suggesting. Quinn nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. It's not a small thing I'm asking." He smiled gently. "And I'm not fully healed yet, so we have time to talk more." The walk back to the cabin was quieter than their journey out, both lost in thoughts of what might be. Kathleen's mind raced with possibilities she had long ago stopped allowing herself to consider: a partner, a shared life, perhaps even children someday. But doubt shadowed these dreams. Would Quinn still want her once they were away from this isolated setting? Would his feelings change when he no longer needed her healing skills? They were approaching the cabin when the sound of hoofbeats made them both freeze. Around the bend in the path appeared Sheriff Layton, accompanied by two other men Kathleen recognized as town deputies. Quinn instinctively moved slightly in front of Kathleen, his posture straightening despite the pain it must have caused his wound. "Miss Avery," Layton called, reining his horse to a stop. "I see your patient is up and about." His cold gaze shifted to Quinn. "Mr. Pearson, I presume?" "Sheriff." Quinn nodded calmly. "I understand you've been looking for me." "That I have." Layton dismounted, his deputies following suit. "You're wanted for questioning about a disturbance at the Silver Dollar Saloon. A man was injured." "I acted in self-defense," Quinn said evenly. "He pulled a knife when I won at cards." One of the deputies snorted. "That's not how Mullins tells it." "Says you cheated, then attacked him when he called you on it." Quinn's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Mullins is lying. Ask the bartender or any of the other players at the table. They saw what happened." "We did ask," Layton said. "Stories differ." "Which means you're coming with us until we sort it out." His hand moved toward the handcuffs at his belt. "He's injured," Kathleen protested, stepping forward. "The wound could reopen if you take him now." Layton's expression hardened. "With all due respect to your..." Methods, Miss Avery. We have a proper doctor in town now. He can tend to any medical needs. I gave my word I'd come in when I was healed, Quinn said. Just give me one more day, Sheriff. I'm afraid I'm done waiting. Layton nodded to his deputies, who moved toward Quinn. You'll come now, peacefully or otherwise. Kathleen watched in dismay as they handcuffed Quinn, whose face betrayed only a flicker of pain as the movement pulled at his wound. He met her eyes, silently communicating that she shouldn't interfere. I'll be fine, he told her quietly. Don't worry. At least let me give you fresh bandages and medicine to take with you, Kathleen pleaded with the sheriff. After a moment's hesitation, Layton nodded. Make it quick. Inside the cabin, as Kathleen hurriedly gathered supplies, she whispered to Quinn, "This isn't right. They're treating you like a criminal." "It's just questioning for now," Quinn reassured her, though his expression was grim. "I've done nothing wrong. The truth will come out. The truth doesn't always matter in this town." Kathleen's hands trembled as she packed herbs into small pouches. "Not when people's minds are already made up. Have faith," Quinn said softly, "and if things go poorly—" He glanced out the window where the sheriff waited. "Remember what we discussed at the Springs. The offer stands." Before Kathleen could respond, one of the deputies called from outside. "Time's up." With one last lingering look, Quinn was led away, mounted awkwardly on his own horse with his hands cuffed before him. Kathleen stood at the cabin door, watching until they disappeared from view, a sense of foreboding settling over her like a shroud. For the first time in years, she had allowed herself to care deeply for another person. Now she faced the very real possibility of losing him, not to his California dreams, but to the prejudice and suspicion that had shadowed her own life for so long. Night fell over Pahrump, bringing with it a chill that seemed to seep into Kathleen's bones as she paced her small cabin. Hours had passed since Quinn had been taken, and with each passing moment, her worry deepened. What was happening in town? Was he being treated fairly, or had judgment already been passed? Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Kathleen made a decision. Throwing a shawl around her shoulders, she saddled her mare and set out for town. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to follow the rutted road safely. Parhump's main street was quiet when she arrived, but lights still burned in the sheriff's office and the saloon. Kathleen tied her horse at the edge of town, preferring to approach on foot. As she passed the general store, a voice called her name, startling her. "Miss Avery, what brings you to town at this hour?" Mrs. Peterson stepped from the shadows of the store's porch, a basket on her arm. The older woman was one of the few who still openly acknowledged Kathleen in public. "Mrs. Peterson." Kathleen nodded politely. "I've come about Mr. Pearson. Do you know what's happened to him?" The older woman glanced around nervously before stepping closer. "They've got him locked up at the jail, but there's trouble brewing, child. Mullins has friends, and they've been drinking all evening, talking about taking matters into their own hands." A cold dread settled in Kathleen's stomach. "What do you mean, vigilante justice?" Mrs. Peterson whispered. Sheriff Layton rode out to the Benson Ranch on an emergency call, left only young Deputy Wilson watching the jail. Kathleen's mind raced. An inexperienced deputy would be no match for an angry mob. "Thank you for telling me." As she turned toward the jail, Mrs. Peterson caught her arm. "Be careful, girl. The town's mood has been dark lately. Dr. Merrill has been telling stories." "What stories?" The older woman looked uncomfortable. "Says he examined the Tillman baby that was stillborn last month. Claims there were unnatural things about it. Says only witchcraft could explain it." Anger flared in Kathleen. "That's absurd. Martha Tillman was barely eating during her pregnancy. The baby was malnourished." "I know that, child, but people believe what feeds their fears." Mrs. Peterson squeezed her arm. Watch yourself tonight." With this new worry added to her burden, Kathleen continued toward the jail. As she approached, she could hear raised voices from the saloon down the street. A group of men had gathered on the boardwalk outside, their angry tones carrying in the night air. "Shouldn't wait for a trial. We all know what happened. Mullins says the bastard tried to kill him. That's enough for me." Kathleen ducked into the shadows beside the gunsmith's shop, her heart pounding. The situation was deteriorating faster than she'd feared. At the jail, she found the front door locked. Moving to the side of the building, she peered through a barred window. Quinn sat on a cot in one of the cells, his head bowed. Even in the dim lamplight, she could see a fresh bruise on his cheek that hadn't been there when the sheriff took him. She tapped lightly on the window. Quinn's head snapped up, eyes widening when he saw her face. "Kathleen," he whispered, moving quickly to the window. "What are you doing here? It's not safe." "There's trouble coming," she said urgently. "Mullins and his friends are planning something. Is your wound all right?" Quinn grimaced. It reopened during questioning. Their idea of justice isn't gentle. Rage bloomed in Kathleen's chest at the casual cruelty. "We need to get you out of here." "Where's the deputy?" "Front desk, half asleep last I saw. He's just a kid, Kathleen. Doesn't know what he's gotten himself into." The sounds from the saloon grew louder, suggesting the group was moving. They didn't have much time. "Stand back," Kathleen instructed, reaching into her pocket. She withdrew a small cloth pouch, one of many remedies she'd prepared earlier that day. "What are you doing?" Quinn asked, watching as she extracted a pinch of powder from the pouch. "Something my grandmother taught me." Kathleen blew the powder through the bars. It floated into the cell, a fine dust that sparkled briefly in the lamplight. "Breathe deeply," she instructed. Quinn inhaled obediently, then looked puzzled. What was that supposed to? A clatter from the front of the building interrupted him. The deputy called out nervously, "Who's there?" "This is official business." "Quick," Kathleen whispered. "Pretend to be terribly ill. Call for help." Understanding dawned in Quinn's eyes. He staggered back from the window, clutching his side and letting out a convincing groan of agony. "Deputy," he called. "Something's wrong. I think the wound's gone bad." Kathleen hurried around to the front of the building, composing her features into an expression of grave concern as the young deputy opened the door, pistol in hand. "Miss Avery." He looked bewildered. "What are you?" Another pained cry came from Quinn's cell. The deputy glanced nervously over his shoulder. "I was passing through town when I heard the commotion," Kathleen said hurriedly. "Your prisoner needs medical attention. His wound may be infected." The deputy, who couldn't have been more than 20, looked uncertain. "Doctor Merrill is across town and likely asleep," Kathleen finished for him. "I'm here now, and from the sounds of it, your prisoner doesn't have time to wait." Another moan from Quinn, followed by the sound of retching, sealed the decision. The deputy reluctantly allowed Kathleen inside, keeping his pistol ready. Quinn was on his knees in the cell, looking genuinely ill. The performance was convincing enough that Kathleen momentarily wondered if her powder had had more effect than intended. "He was fine an hour ago," the deputy said, fumbling with the cell keys. "Infections can turn quickly," Kathleen replied, her tone professional. "Let me examine him." Once inside the cell, she knelt beside Quinn, making a show of checking his bandages. "There's a mob forming at the saloon," she whispered. "We need to leave immediately." Quinn gave an imperceptible nod, then groaned loudly for the deputy's benefit. "He needs herbs I have in my bag outside," Kathleen announced. "And clean water. Deputy, could you fetch some from the pump?" The young man hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with leaving them alone. "He's in no condition to escape," Kathleen pointed out reasonably. "And I'm unarmed. Please, he's growing worse by the minute." As soon as the deputy left with the water bucket, Kathleen pulled another pouch from her pocket. "This will help with the pain from your actual wound," she explained, helping Quinn to his feet. "But we must hurry." They moved swiftly to the front office where Quinn's gun belt hung on a wall hook. He buckled it on while Kathleen peered out the window. "The street's clear for now, but not for long," she reported. "My horse is tied behind the general store." The deputy returned just as they reached the door, his eyes widening in shock as he took in Quinn's transformed state. The Quinn moved quickly, disarming the young man before he could raise an alarm. "I'm sorry about this, son," he said, genuinely regretful, "but I can't stay for a lynching." Using strips torn from a blanket, they bound and gagged the deputy, positioning him comfortably in a chair. "He'll be found soon enough," Quinn assured Kathleen, who looked troubled by the necessity of their actions. Outside, they could hear the mob growing louder, moving down the street from the saloon. Quinn took Kathleen's hand, and together they slipped out the back door of the jail, keeping to the shadows as they made their way to her waiting horse. "We'll both ride," Quinn decided, helping her mount before swinging up behind her despite his injured side. "Back to your cabin." Kathleen shook her head. "They'll look there first. I know somewhere safer." As they rode out of town, shouts erupted behind them, the mob discovering the empty cell. Kathleen guided her mare off the main road onto a narrow trail that wound through scrubby pine and sage. "Where are we going?" Quinn asked, his arms around her waist as they rode double. "The springs," Kathleen replied. "There's a cave nearby where grandmother and I sometimes stayed when gathering certain plants that can only be harvested at night." The ride was tense, both of them listening for sounds of pursuit. Quinn's wound had indeed reopened during his time in jail, and Kathleen could feel warm blood seeping through his shirt where his chest pressed against her back. They reached the canyon as the moon began its descent toward the horizon. Kathleen led them past the springs to a hidden opening in the rock face, barely visible unless one knew exactly where to look. Inside, the cave opened into a space large enough to stand in, with a small natural chimney that would draw smoke without revealing their location. Old blankets and basic supplies indicated the place had indeed been used as a shelter before. "Grandmother called this our sanctuary," Kathleen explained, lighting a small lamp she retrieved from a niche in the wall. "No one else knows about it." Quinn sank gratefully onto a bedroll, his face pale with pain and exertion. "Clever woman, your grandmother." Kathleen knelt beside him, gently helping him remove his shirt to examine the wound. The stitches had torn and fresh blood seeped from the reopened gash. "I need to clean this again," she said, gathering supplies from a small wooden chest stored in the cave. "Some of the stitches will have to be redone." As she worked, Quinn watched her face, illuminated by the soft lamplight. "You risked everything coming for me tonight," he said quietly. Kathleen's hands remained steady as she cleaned the wound. "You would have done the same for me." "Yes," he agreed simply. "I would have." Their eyes met over the wound she was tending, and in that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition of feelings that had grown rapidly in the days since he'd stumbled into her cabin. "We're fugitives now," Kathleen said softly, beginning to restitch the torn flesh. "Both of us." "I'm the fugitive," Quinn corrected. "You were just helping someone in need. It's what you do." "They won't see it that way." Kathleen tied off a stitch. "Especially not after what Mrs. Peterson told me tonight." She related the conversation about Dr. Merrill's accusations, watching Quinn's expression darken with each word. "It seems we both have reason to leave Pahrump," he observed when she finished. "It seems we do." Kathleen applied a fresh poultice to the wound, her mind turning over possibilities she had never seriously considered until now. California is a long journey, not so long with good company. Quinn's hand covered hers where it rested on his bandaged side. Kathleen, I meant what I said at the Springs. I want you with me, not just because you're a skilled healer or because we're both in trouble now. Because in the few days I've known you, I've felt more alive, more myself than I have in years. Kathleen's heart raced at his words, hope and fear tangling within her. What if it's just this situation? The danger, the close quarters? It's not. Quinn's voice was certain. I've been in plenty of dangerous situations, never felt anything like this. He sat up despite her protests, bringing their faces close together. I'm not asking for promises, just a chance to see what might grow between us in a place where neither of us carries the weight of the past. Kathleen thought of her cabin, her garden, the life she'd built in Pahrump. They represented security, but also isolation, a half-life lived in the shadows of other people's fear. And now even that tenuous existence was threatened. Yes, she whispered, the decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. Yes, I'll come with you to California. The relief and joy that spread across Quinn's face made something in her chest tighten with emotion. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she chose, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. Kathleen had been kissed before, in her youth before the whispers of witchcraft began, but never like this, never with such tenderness and promise. Her hands came up to frame his face, feeling the warmth of his skin, the slight rasp of stubble beneath her fingertips. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. We'll leave at first light, he murmured. Head west toward the Sierra Nevada. I know places we can cross safely, even this time of year. Kathleen nodded, reality already intruding on the moment. We'll need supplies. I have money saved, hidden in the cabin. It's too dangerous for you to go back there. Quinn's expression turned serious. But I know someone who might help. An old friend has a ranch about 20 miles from here. Quentin Ross. He owes me a favor, several, in fact. They spent the next hour planning their escape, weighing risks and options. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them both, and they settled on the blankets, Quinn's arm protectively around Kathleen as they drifted toward sleep. Quinn, Kathleen murmured, already half dreaming. Thank you for stumbling into my cabin. His arm tightened slightly around her. Best mistake I ever made. Outside, the night creatures called to one another, and the springs bubbled their eternal song. Inside the hidden cave, two people who had long ago resigned themselves to solitude found unexpected comfort in each other's presence, and perhaps the beginnings of something more enduring than either had dared to hope for. The dawn broke with gentle fingers of light probing the cave entrance. Kathleen woke first, momentarily disoriented until she felt the warm weight of Quinn's arm around her waist. The events of the previous night rushed back: the jail, the escape, their decision to flee together. She slipped carefully from Quinn's embrace, not wanting to disturb his healing sleep. His color looked better this morning, she noted with relief. The rest had done him good, despite the stress of their escape. Moving quietly, she rekindled the small fire and set water to boil using the basic supplies stored in the cave. As she worked, her mind turned over their situation. They were fugitives now, Quinn accused of assault. Perhaps worse if Mullins and his friends had their way, and she implicated in his escape. Going back to her cabin was dangerous, but there were things she couldn't leave behind: her grandmother's journal with generations of healing knowledge, the special seedlings she'd nurtured, certain rare medicines that couldn't be easily replaced. Quinn stirred, his eyes finding her immediately upon waking. You're thinking too loudly, he observed, his voice rough with sleep. Kathleen smiled despite her worries. Just planning. He sat up carefully, testing his wound with gentle fingers. How bad is it out there, do you think? By now, the sheriff will have returned. They'll be searching. She passed him a cup of herbal tea. This will help with the pain and give you energy. Quinn accepted the cup, their fingers brushing. We need to move quickly then. I need to retrieve some things from my cabin first, Kathleen said, bracing for his objection. It came immediately. Too dangerous. They'll be watching it. There are things there I can't leave behind, Quinn. My grandmother's knowledge, special medicines, nothing is worth your safety. His expression was stubborn. Kathleen matched his resolve with her own. Some things are. That journal contains healing knowledge passed down through generations. It's not just valuable to me, it could help countless others. They locked eyes in a silent battle of wills, neither willing to yield. Finally, Quinn sighed. At least let me go with you. You're injured and they're specifically looking for you. Kathleen shook her head. I know ways to approach my cabin without being seen. I grew up learning to move unseen through forests much denser than this. Quinn frowned, clearly unhappy with the plan but recognizing the determination in her eyes. How long will it take you? 2 hours there and back if all goes well. Kathleen began gathering her things. I'll bring what we need, then we'll head for your friend's ranch. If you're not back by midday, I'm coming after you, Quinn warned, his concern evident. Kathleen leaned down, surprising them both by pressing a quick kiss to his lips. I'll be back, she promised. The journey back toward her cabin was tense, every snapped twig and bird call making Kathleen freeze in vigilance. She approached from the forested side, using a deer path that circled around to the back of the property. From a concealed position among the trees, she observed the cabin for nearly half an hour, looking for signs of watchers. The place appeared undisturbed, but Kathleen remained cautious as she crept to the back door, slipping inside with barely a sound. Once within, she moved quickly, gathering only the most essential items: her grandmother's journal, packets of rare seeds, special medicines, a small pouch of saved coins, and a few personal treasures, including a cameo that had belonged to her mother. She was nearly finished when a noise outside froze her in place, the unmistakable sound of approaching horses. Peering cautiously through a crack in the shutters, her heart sank. Sheriff Layton and 3 deputies were approaching from the main road, their expressions grim. There was no time to finish gathering her things. Kathleen grabbed her partially filled bag and slipped out the back door just as the sheriff reached the front. Crouching low behind the woodpile, she heard Layton's voice carrying clearly in the morning air. Search everywhere. They can't have gone far with his injury. Miss Avery may return for supplies. One of the deputies sounded uncertain. Sir, are we sure she's helping him willingly? What if he forced her? She broke him out of my jail, Wilson, Layton replied coldly. That's not the action of an unwilling accomplice. Moving silently from one bit of cover to the next, Kathleen made her way back to the forest edge. She had almost reached the trees when a shout went up from the cabin. Sheriff, the back door's unlatched. Someone's been here. Kathleen abandoned stealth for speed, running now as boots pounded on the cabin's wooden floor. She plunged into the forest just as a deputy emerged from the back door, his shout alerting the others. There, in the trees. The sound of pursuit followed her as she raced along the deer path, her heart hammering. Kathleen knew these woods better than her pursuers, but they were mounted and would circle around if given the chance. She diverted from the path, climbing up a steep embankment where horses would struggle to follow. A shot rang out, splintering bark from a tree near her head. Kathleen ducked lower but kept moving, using every trick her grandmother had taught her for moving unseen through wilderness. Another shot, wider of the mark this time, followed by the sheriff's angry voice. Hold your fire. We need her alive. The words chilled her more than the gunshots. What did they think she had done? Or perhaps they simply wanted to use her to recapture Quinn. She took a twisting route back to the springs, doubling back several times and wading through the stream to hide her trail. By the time she reached the hidden cave, her skirts were torn and mudded, her breath coming in painful gasps. Quinn was on his feet immediately, his face tight with concern. "What happened, Sheriff?" she managed between breaths. "At the cabin. They saw me." He cursed under his breath, helping her to sit. "Are you hurt?" "No, just winded, but they're searching the area." Kathleen pushed damp hair from her face. "We need to leave now. Did you get what you needed?" She nodded, patting her bag. "Most of it, the important things." Quinn was already gathering their few belongings. "Then let's go. My horse is hidden nearby. We'll ride double until we reach Quentin's ranch." They moved quickly, abandoning the cave that had sheltered them. Quinn led her to where he'd concealed his horse the previous day, a sturdy bay gelding that eyed them warily. "This is Thunder," Quinn introduced as he tightened the saddle girth. "He's not used to carrying double, but he's strong." Kathleen approached the horse carefully, speaking softly as she offered her hand for him to sniff. "Hello, Thunder. We need your help today." The horse nickered softly, seeming to accept her, which drew a surprised look from Quinn. He's usually wary of strangers. "Animals sense intentions," Kathleen replied, stroking the bay's neck. "He knows I mean no harm." Quinn helped her mount before swinging up behind her, his wounded side clearly paining him despite his attempts to hide it. "We'll head northwest," he said, orienting himself. "Stay off the main trails." They rode in tense silence, every sense alert for signs of pursuit. Quinn's body was warm against Kathleen's back, his arms secure around her waist as he guided the horse through the rough terrain. Despite the danger, she found herself aware of the intimacy of their position, the way his breath stirred her hair, the steady beat of his heart against her shoulder blade. "You're thinking again," Quinn murmured near her ear. "I can feel you tensing up." "Just wondering what happens next," Kathleen admitted, "if we make it to California." His arms tightened slightly around her. "We start fresh, find land, build a home. You can practice your healing without fear of being called a witch." "Is it really that simple?" "No," Quinn acknowledged honestly. "Nothing worth having ever is. But it's possible, Kathleen. A new life where we're judged by what we do, not what others say about us." The vision he painted was seductive in its simplicity, a place where her skills would be valued rather than feared. A home shared with someone who saw her clearly and wanted her anyway. It seemed almost too perfect, too fragile to survive the harsh realities of the world. "What if it doesn't work between us?" she asked softly. "What if, once we're away from danger, we find we don't suit after all?" Quinn was quiet for a moment, considering. "Then we part as friends and you'll still have your freedom and a fresh start. I wouldn't hold you to anything you didn't freely choose." His voice turned solemn. "I'm not offering you rescue, Kathleen, just partnership if you want it." His answer reassured her. It wasn't blind romantic fantasy driving him, but something more grounded, a recognition of possibilities, with space for them both to choose their path forward. They rode through the heat of midday, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and drink from a clear stream. By late afternoon, they had reached rolling grassland dotted with scattered oak trees, ranch country. "Almost there," Quinn said, pointing toward a column of smoke rising in the distance. "That's Quentin's place." As they crested a small rise, a modest ranch spread out before them, a main house, barn, corral, and several outbuildings, all well maintained. A few cattle grazed in a nearby pasture, and the smoke they'd seen came from a cook fire where a man was tending something that smelled deliciously of roasting meat. He looked up at their approach, hand moving instinctively to his hip, before recognition dawned on his weathered face. "Quinn Pearson, as I live and breathe." The man grinned broadly, revealing a missing front tooth. "Thought you'd be halfway to California by now." Quinn dismounted carefully, helping Kathleen down before embracing his friend with his good arm. "Had a slight delay, Quentin. This is Kathleen Avery." Kathleen, meet Quentin Ross, the orneriest cowhand in Texas and now, apparently, a gentleman rancher. Quentin removed his hat, nodding respectfully to Kathleen. "Madam, any friend of Quinn's is welcome here. Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Ross." Quentin's eyes narrowed as he took in Quinn's pallor and the blood seeping through his shirt. "You're hurt, and judging by how you came in from the back way instead of the main road, I'm guessing you're in some kind of trouble." "You could say that," Quinn admitted. "Mind if we talk inside?" Over a simple but hearty meal of beef stew and biscuits, Quinn explained their situation while Quentin listened without interruption. When the story was finished, the rancher leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Sheriff Layton," he mused. "He's got a reputation for holding grudges. And this Mullins fella sounds like the type to lie to save face." "That about sums it up," Quinn agreed. "We need to lie low for a day or two, then head west." Quentin nodded. "You can stay as long as you need. I've got a line shack about a mile from here, not comfortable as the main house, but private. No one would think to look for you there." "We don't want to bring trouble to your door," Kathleen said, aware of the risk the rancher was taking by harboring them. Quentin waved away her concern. "Quinn saved my life during the war. Carried me 3 miles with a bullet in his leg after our regiment was ambushed. I've been waiting 10 years to repay that debt." He stood, moving to a cabinet from which he withdrew a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses. "Besides," he added with a wink, "I've always enjoyed thumbing my nose at authority." As night fell, Quentin escorted them to the line shack, a simple one-room structure used by cowboys watching the herd's boundary lines. It was basic but clean, with a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed. "It's not much," Quentin apologized, lighting the lamp, "but it's warm and dry." "It's perfect," Kathleen assured him. "Thank you." After Quentin left, promising to return in the morning with supplies, Kathleen turned to Quinn with concern. "Let me check your wound. You reopened it during the ride." Quinn submitted to her examination without protest, sitting on the edge of the bed while she carefully unwrapped the bandage. The wound looked angry, the edges inflamed where the stitches had torn. "I need to clean this again," she said, opening her bag of salvaged supplies. "It'll hurt." "I trust you," Quinn replied simply. As Kathleen worked, her fingers gentle but firm, Quinn watched her face, the concentration in her eyes, the small furrow between her brows when she encountered a particularly sensitive spot. When she finally applied a fresh poultice and bandage, he caught her hand in his. "Thank you," he said softly, "not just for this, for everything." Kathleen met his gaze, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how intimate the small cabin felt with just the 2 of them. "You'd have done the same." "I would have tried." Quinn's thumb traced circles on her palm. "But I wouldn't have been half as competent." A smile tugged at her lips. "You have other skills." "Do I?" His expression turned playful despite his obvious tiredness. "You're alive after 10 years of drifting. That suggests considerable skill." Kathleen's free hand moved to push a lock of hair from his forehead, the gesture tender. "And you have a way with people. Quentin clearly thinks the world of you." Quentin's easily impressed. But Quinn's eyes warmed at her touch. "You should rest. Take the bed. I'll use the bedroll Quentin left." Kathleen shook her head. "You're injured. You need proper rest more than I do." "We could share," Quinn suggested, then quickly added, "just for sleep. The bed's narrow but big enough for 2 if we're friendly." The proposition should have scandalized her, but after the intimacy of their escape, riding pressed together for hours, sleeping side by side in the cave, conventional propriety seemed a distant concern. "All right," she agreed. "But if your wound starts bleeding again in the night, you tell me immediately." They settled onto the bed, Quinn's back against the wall, Kathleen in the circle of his arms. It was indeed a tight fit, requiring them to lie close together, but Kathleen found she didn't mind. There was comfort in his nearness, in the steady rhythm of his breathing against her hair. "Kathleen," Quinn's voice was soft in the darkness. "Yes. When we reach California, what kind of place would you like? A town where you can practice healing? Or somewhere more remote?" The question made her realize she hadn't thought that far ahead, focused as she'd been on the immediate need to escape. "I don't know," she admitted. "Somewhere with good soil for a garden, access to different plants. Perhaps near enough to people that I can help when needed, but with enough privacy to live in peace." "Sounds like we want similar things," Quinn mused. "I've been thinking about the northern part of the state, the Sacramento Valley. Good farmland, they say, with mountains nearby where timber grows. A man could build something real there. You've given this a lot of thought, had a lot of years to think about it." His arm tightened slightly around her waist. "Never thought I'd be bringing someone with me, though." Kathleen turned slightly in his embrace, looking up at his face in the dim light filtering through the cabin's single window. "Are you sorry about that?" "Sorry." Quinn looked genuinely surprised. "Kathleen, meeting you is the best thing that's happened to me in longer than I care to remember." The simple sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. Kathleen raised a hand to his cheek, her fingertips light against his skin. "Even with all the trouble I've brought you, trouble found me long before you did," he reminded her with a soft laugh. "At least this time the company makes it worthwhile." She wasn't sure who moved first, only that suddenly his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then with growing intensity as she responded. His hand came up to cradle the back of her head, fingers tangling in her hair as the kiss deepened. Kathleen felt herself melting into him, years of loneliness and isolation dissolving in the heat of his touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that properly since the cave," he admitted. "What stopped you?" Kathleen's voice was barely above a whisper. "Wasn't sure you were ready." His thumb traced the curve of her cheek. "Wasn't sure I deserved to ask." "You didn't ask," she pointed out with a small smile. "You just did it. Moment of bravery." His eyes searched hers in the darkness. "Do you regret it?" In answer, Kathleen leaned forward, pressing her lips to his once more. This kiss was softer, a gentle exploration rather than the urgent connection of before. "Does that answer your question?" she asked when they parted. Quinn's smile was visible even in the dim light. "It'll do for now." They settled back into their shared space, Kathleen's head tucked beneath Quinn's chin, his arm a comforting weight around her. Outside, coyotes called to one another across the range island, but within the small cabin, a fragile peace had settled, a moment of calm in the midst of their uncertain journey. As she drifted toward sleep, Kathleen realized that for the first time in years, she was looking forward to tomorrow, not with dread of what new suspicion or accusation might arise, but with hope for possibilities yet to unfold. It was a peculiar feeling, unfamiliar after so long, but one she found she could easily grow accustomed to. The next morning brought clear skies and the arrival of Quentin with provisions as promised. His eyebrows rose slightly at finding Quinn and Kathleen emerging from the cabin together, but he made no comment beyond a knowing smile that caused Kathleen to blush despite herself. "Brought you food, fresh clothes, and news," Quentin announced, unloading supplies from his pack horse. None of it particularly good, I'm afraid. The news or the food? Quinn asked, helping to carry the bundles inside. The news. Food's excellent, my housekeeper Sarah made it. Quentin's expression turned serious. Sheriff Layton's deputized a dozen men to search for you both. They've been asking at every ranch and homestead within 20 miles of Pahrump. Kathleen's stomach tightened with anxiety. Have they been here yet? No, but it's just a matter of time. Quentin rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. And there's more. They're saying in town that you're not just a witch anymore, Miss Avery. They're claiming you bewitched Quinn here to help you escape some kind of ritual they interrupted. Ritual, Kathleen repeated incredulously. What ritual? Quentin looked uncomfortable. Something about the Tillman baby. Dr. Merrill's been telling folks he found evidence of unnatural practices. Anger flashed in Kathleen's eyes. That's absurd. I never even attended Martha Tillman's birth. She refused my help. I believe you, Quentin assured her, but folks are scared and looking for someone to blame. Between that and Quinn's escape, they've worked themselves into quite a lather. Quinn's hand came to rest at the small of Kathleen's back, a silent gesture of support. How long before they reach your ranch, do you think? A day, maybe two, Quentin sighed. I hate to say it, friend, but you need to move on sooner than we planned. They're watching the roads west, expecting you to head for California. Any suggestions? Quinn asked. Go south first, Quentin advised. Cross into California through the Mojave. It's a hard route this time of year, but they won't expect it. I can give you maps, supplies. Kathleen considered the implications. The Mojave in summer is dangerous. Limited water, extreme heat. It is, Quentin agreed, but not as dangerous as a lynch mob. And I know you're good in rough country, Quinn. They spent the morning planning their route, with Quentin marking water sources and potential dangers on a rough map. By midday, the plan was set they would leave at dusk, traveling by night to avoid the worst heat and reduce the chance of being spotted. While Quinn and Quentin discussed the details of their journey, Kathleen stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The ranch spread out before her, peaceful under the summer sun. In the distance, cattle grazed lazily and a hawk circled overhead, riding thermals in its endless search for prey. It was a beautiful country in its harsh way, not unlike Pahrump with its blend of desert and mountains. She would miss it, the familiar landscape, the plants she'd come to know intimately, even the springs with their healing waters. But what awaited her in California could be even better. Freedom from suspicion, a chance to practice her healing openly, and perhaps most importantly, a future with Quinn, this man who had stumbled into her life and changed everything in the space of a few days. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Their connection had formed so quickly, born of crisis and shared danger. Would it survive the journey ahead? Would it flourish in the new life they hoped to build? She was still pondering these questions when Quinn found her, coming to stand beside her at the rough fence that bordered the cabin yard. "Penny for your thoughts," he offered, his shoulder brushing hers. "Just wondering what California will really be like," she replied, not quite ready to share her deeper doubts. Quinn seemed to understand anyway. "It won't be perfect," he said. "No place is, but it'll be ours to shape, Kathleen. That's the difference." She nodded, appreciating his practical optimism. "When did you become so wise, Mr. Pearson?" "Somewhere between getting stabbed and breaking out of jail, I expect." His smile faded into seriousness. "Are you having second thoughts about coming with me?" Kathleen considered the question carefully. Not second thoughts exactly, just awareness of how much is unknown. "That's fair." Quinn's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "I can't promise you certainty, only that whatever comes, we'll face it together if that's still what you want." The simple sincerity in his voice steadied her. "It is," she confirmed, squeezing his hand. "Unknown is better than what awaits us here." "Much better," Quinn agreed, raising her hand to his lips for a brief kiss. "And speaking of what awaits us, Quentin's offered use of his bathhouse before we leave. Said something about not wanting us to offend the desert with our stink." Kathleen laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. When had she last laughed freely? "Your friend has a way with words." "That he does." Quinn's eyes crinkled with humor. "Ladies first," he said. "The bathhouse is behind the main house." The prospect of a real bath after days of travel and tension was too tempting to resist. Kathleen gathered clean clothes from the supplies Quentin had brought and made her way to the small outbuilding behind the ranch house. Inside, she found a large copper tub already filled with steaming water, soap and towels laid out neatly nearby. It was a simple luxury, but one that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. How long had it been since someone had prepared such comforts for her, stripping off her travel-stained clothes? Kathleen sank into the hot water with a sigh of pure pleasure. She allowed herself to simply soak for several minutes, letting the heat ease the tension from her muscles before reaching for the soap. As she bathed, her thoughts drifted to the journey ahead. The Mojave was dangerous, but with proper preparation, they could cross it safely. Beyond that lay California, a new beginning, free from the shadow of suspicion that had darkened her years in Pahrump. And Quinn would be with her. Quinn, with his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness. Quinn, who saw her skills as a gift rather than a curse. Quinn, whose kisses had awakened feelings she'd thought long buried beneath the practical concerns of survival. By the time she emerged from the bathhouse, clean and refreshed in the simple but well-made dress Quentin had provided, Kathleen felt her resolve strengthen. Whatever hardships lay ahead, the promise of freedom and of Quinn's companionship made them worth facing. She found the men in the main house, seated at the kitchen table with cups of coffee and a map spread between them. They looked up at her entrance, and something in Quinn's expression, a warmth that kindled in his eyes as he took in her appearance, sent a pleasant flush to her cheeks. "Feel better?" he asked, rising to offer her a seat. "Much," she confirmed. "Thank you, Mr. Ross, for your hospitality." "Quentin, please," he insisted. "Any woman brave enough to break this scoundrel out of jail has earned the right to use my given name." They spent the afternoon making final preparations, packing food, water, and supplies, studying the map, and resting as much as possible before the difficult journey ahead. Kathleen took the opportunity to create additional medicines from the plants growing around the ranch, supplementing what she'd managed to save from her cabin. As dusk approached, they gathered on the porch of the main house for a final meal before departure. Sarah, Quentin's housekeeper, had prepared a veritable feast: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and an apple pie that made Quinn groan with appreciation at the first bite. "You're spoiling us, Sarah," he told the older woman, who beamed at the compliment. "You need proper feeding before heading into that desert," she replied, adding another helping to his plate despite his protests that he was full. "Both of you, too skinny by half." It was a surprisingly pleasant evening, with conversation flowing easily around the table. Quentin shared stories of his early days establishing the ranch, while Sarah contributed tales of the local community that made them all laugh. For a few hours, Kathleen almost forgot they were fugitives, that danger waited just beyond the boundaries of this friendly homestead. Reality returned as they made final preparations to leave. Quentin had provided them with 2 horses, Quinn's Thunder, and a steady mare named Daisy for Kathleen, along with a pack mule laden with supplies. "The mule knows the southern trails," Quentin explained as they mounted up. He's carried supplies to the mining camps down that way. Follows the water instinctively. Smart animal, Quinn observed, patting the creature's neck. Smarter than most men I know, Quentin agreed with a grin. He sobered, grasping Quinn's hand in a firm shake. Take care of yourself, friend. And your lady. I will. Quinn's expression was solemn. Thank you, Quentin, for everything. Just get to California and start that ranch you've been jawing about for years. Quentin turned to Kathleen. And you, Miss Avery, keep this fool in line. He needs someone with sense looking after him. Kathleen smiled, touched by the rancher's concern. I'll do my best, Mr. Ross Quentin. With final goodbyes exchanged, they set off into the gathering darkness, heading south as Quentin had advised. The night was clear, a half-moon providing just enough light to navigate without making them too visible to potential pursuers. They rode in companionable silence for the first hour, adjusting to the rhythm of night travel. The landscape changed gradually as they moved south, the grasslands of Quentin's ranch giving way to more rugged terrain, scattered with Joshua trees and creosote bush. You're quiet, Quinn observed eventually, guiding his horse alongside hers. Having regrets already? Kathleen shook her head. Just thinking about how quickly life can change. A week ago, I was alone in my cabin, resigned to a life of isolation. Now I'm riding into the desert with a man I barely know, headed for a place I've never seen. When you put it that way, it does sound rather reckless, Quinn acknowledged with a soft laugh. Perhaps it is, Kathleen agreed, but it also feels right somehow, as if this was always meant to happen. Quinn was silent for a moment, considering this. My mother believed in fate, he said finally. Said some things were written in the stars long before we understood them. I never put much stock in it myself, preferred to think I made my own way. He glanced at her, his face half shadowed in the moonlight. But meeting you, how it happened. Makes me wonder if she wasn't onto something. The simple admission touched Kathleen deeply. My grandmother would have agreed with your mother. She always said there were no true coincidences, only patterns we hadn't yet recognized. They continued south through the night, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and consult Quentin's map. The desert was alive with night sounds, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, the distant howl of coyotes, the soft whisper of wind through the Joshua trees. As dawn approached, they found the first landmark. Quentin had marked a natural rock formation beside a small spring. Here they made camp for the day, setting up the small tent Quentin had provided in the shade of a large boulder. We'll rest during the hottest hours, Quinn decided, helping Kathleen down from her horse. Travel again at dusk. Despite the growing heat, they worked efficiently together to establish their camp, watering the animals, preparing a cold meal from their provisions, setting up the tent. There was an easy rhythm to their cooperation, as if they'd been traveling companions for years rather than days. Inside the tent, they spread their bedrolls on the sandy ground, close together in the limited space. Exhaustion from the night's journey quickly overcame them both, and they fell asleep with fingers intertwined between them, a small connection maintained even in slumber. They were awakened late in the afternoon by a sound that made Quinn sit up sharply, instantly alert: the distant but unmistakable bark of tracking hounds. Riders coming, he whispered, already reaching for his gun belt. From the north. Kathleen's heart raced as she listened. Yes, there it was again, the baying of dogs on a scent trail. How far? Hard to say. Sound carries strangely out here. Quinn was already rolling up their bedding, but we need to move. Now. They broke camp with urgent efficiency, loading the animals and obliterating signs of their presence as best they could. The sun was still high, the heat brutal as they mounted up and continued south at a faster pace than was wise given the temperature. "The dogs will struggle in this heat," Quinn said as they rode, scanning the horizon behind them. "But they'll keep coming as long as they have our scent." "Water," Kathleen said suddenly. "We need to find water. It'll break the trail." Quinn nodded approval. "Good thinking." According to Quentin's map, there's a creek about 5 miles ahead. They pushed the horses harder than they would have chosen. The animals' flanks soon dark with sweat, despite the dry air. Behind them, the sound of the hounds grew gradually fainter as distance and heat worked against the pursuing pack. The creek, when they reached it, was little more than a trickle between rocks, but it was flowing water precious in the desert and exactly what they needed. They guided the horses directly into the shallow stream bed, following its course south for nearly a mile before emerging onto dry land again. "That should confuse them for a while," Quinn said, allowing the horses to drink briefly before continuing. "But we need to make more distance before nightfall." They rode hard through the remaining daylight hours, the terrain growing increasingly harsh as they entered the true desert. By the time darkness fell, bringing blessed relief from the heat, they had left the pursuit far behind but at a cost. The horses were weary, and Quinn's wound had begun seeping blood again, a dark stain spreading slowly across his shirt. "We need to stop," Kathleen insisted when she noticed. "You're bleeding." Quinn looked down with mild surprise, as if he'd been too focused on their escape to notice his own discomfort. "It's not bad. It will be if we don't treat it," she countered firmly, "and the horses need rest." Recognizing the sense in her argument, Quinn reluctantly agreed to make camp in a small hollow protected by large boulders. As Kathleen tended to his wound by lantern light, she was relieved to find it less serious than she'd feared, just a few stitches torn by the day's exertion. "You're fortunate," she told him as she applied a fresh poultice. "If this had opened completely, we'd be in real trouble." "I have good reason to stay alive these days," Quinn replied, his eyes holding hers in the dim light. The simple statement carried a weight of meaning that made Kathleen's hands pause in their work. It was the closest either of them had come to directly addressing the deepening connection between them. The unspoken understanding that whatever had begun in her cabin was growing into something neither had anticipated, but both increasingly valued. "As do I," she said softly, resuming her ministrations. They slept briefly that night, taking turns standing watch in case the pursuit managed to pick up their trail again. But dawn broke with no sign of followers, and they continued their journey with cautious optimism. The next 3 days fell into a pattern, traveling during the cooler hours of early morning and evening, resting during the brutal midday heat. The landscape grew increasingly stark as they pushed deeper into the Mojave, the scattered vegetation giving way to vast stretches of sand and rock, broken only occasionally by the twisted forms of desert plants clinging tenaciously to life. Water became their most precious commodity, each source marked carefully on Quentin's map, a cause for celebration when reached. The pack mule proved its worth, not only carrying their supplies but indeed seeming to sense the presence of water before the humans or horses detected it. On the 4th day, as they sheltered from the midday sun beneath an overhanging rock, Kathleen noticed Quinn staring thoughtfully at the horizon. "What is it?" she asked, passing him the canteen. "Just thinking about what comes next," he replied, taking a careful sip of their rationed water. "We should reach the California border tomorrow or the next day. After that, it's about a week to the Sacramento Valley if we can find passage through the mountains. And then," Quinn turned to her, his expression serious, "and then we decide what kind of life we want to build." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "Together, I hope. But I meant what I said before, Kathleen. You'll have choices in California, If you decide you want something different than what I can offer, she silenced him with a finger to his lips. Quinn Pearson, for a man with so many practical skills, you can be remarkably dense sometimes. He raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. I didn't leave everything I knew behind just for California, she said, holding his gaze steadily. I came because of you. Because in the space of a few days, you showed me more respect and understanding than I've known in years. Because when you look at me, you see a woman, not a witch or a curiosity or a threat. Quinn's expression softened. Is that all it takes to win your heart? Basic human decency. It shouldn't be remarkable, should it? Kathleen's voice held a hint of sadness. But it is, in a world where fear turns neighbors into enemies. Then the world's a poorer place than it should be. Quinn drew her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. But I'm grateful it led you to me, whatever the reason. When he kissed her this time, there was none of the hesitation of their earlier embraces, only certainty and a deepening passion that left them both breathless. They came together beneath the desert sky, the harsh landscape a stark contrast to the tenderness they found in each other's arms. Later, as they prepared to resume their journey, Kathleen felt a curious lightness despite the physical challenges of desert travel. Something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings too significant to be denied or delayed any longer. Whatever awaited them in California, whatever home they might build together, they had already begun the foundation here in the unforgiving clarity of the desert. 2 days later, they crossed into California, marking the occasion with their last swallow of Quentin's whiskey, passed between them as they stood on a rise overlooking the vast expanse of new territory spread before them. To new beginnings, Quinn toasted, offering Kathleen the flask. And the end of being hunted, she added, taking a small sip and wincing slightly at the burn. The terrain had begun to change as they moved west, the stark desert gradually yielding to areas of sparse woodland and occasional meadows. Water became more plentiful, the desperate rationing of the Mojave crossing no longer necessary. Game was more abundant too, allowing Quinn to hunt successfully one evening, providing them with fresh meat for the first time since leaving Quentin's ranch. As they sat beside their small fire that night, savoring the roasted rabbit, Kathleen found herself studying the man across from her with new eyes. In the flickering light, she could see how the journey had changed him, his face leaner, his skin darkened by sun, but his eyes clearer, more focused than when he'd first stumbled wounded into her cabin. "What?" he asked, catching her gaze. "Just thinking how different you look from the man who collapsed at my door," she replied honestly. Stronger now, more purposeful. Quinn considered this. "I feel different," he admitted. "For years after the war I was just existing. Moving from place to place, never settling, never really living." He met her eyes across the fire. "I think I was waiting, though I didn't know it then. For what? For something worth stopping for." The simplicity of his answer made Kathleen's heart tighten with emotion. The days that followed brought them gradually closer to their destination, the land growing greener and more welcoming as they approached the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. They encountered occasional travelers, now miners, traders, settlers heading east, but none who seemed interested in a quiet couple making their way west. One afternoon, they crested a hill to find a small town nestled in the valley below the first settlement of any size they'd seen since leaving Nevada. "What do you think?" Quinn asked, reining in his horse beside hers. "Shall we risk it? We could use fresh supplies, and the horses would benefit from proper grain." Kathleen studied the town thoughtfully. "Do you think news of us would have reached this far?" "Doubtful," Quinn decided after consideration. "We're well into California now, and this looks like a mining town. They tend to mind their own business." They approached cautiously nonetheless, entering the town Minersville, according to the weathered sign from the south rather than the east. It was a typical frontier settlement, a main street lined with basic businesses, a few side streets of simple homes, the inevitable saloon doing brisk business despite the early hour. At the general store, they purchased supplies while carefully avoiding any detail about where they'd come from or where they were headed. The storekeeper, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, was more interested in their money than their story. As Quinn loaded their purchases onto the pack mule, Kathleen's attention was caught by a woman hurrying toward them, anxiety evident in her face. "Excuse me," she called, approaching Kathleen rather than Quinn. "Are you a doctor, or know something of medicine?" Kathleen hesitated, years of caution making her wary. "I have some knowledge of healing. Why do you ask?" "It's my son," the woman explained breathlessly. "He's burning with fever. Our town doctor left last month for San Francisco, and there's no one else who knows more than basic doctoring." Quinn and Kathleen exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. This was exactly the kind of situation that had led to accusations of witchcraft in Pahrump, and yet a child was suffering. "I'll come," Kathleen decided, gathering her medical bag from her saddlebags. To Quinn, she added quietly, "I'll be careful." "I'll come with you," he replied, his tone making it clear this wasn't negotiable. The woman, who introduced herself as Martha Collins, led them to a small house at the edge of town. Inside, a boy of about 10 lay on a narrow bed, his face flushed with fever, his breathing labored. "How long has he been like this?" Kathleen asked, moving immediately to the child's side. 3 days now," Martha replied, wringing her hands. "It started with a cough, then the fever came." Kathleen examined the boy carefully, listening to his chest, checking his throat and eyes, feeling the glands in his neck. "Has anyone else in town been sick with similar symptoms?" "A few of the children, yes. One of the minors, too." Nodding thoughtfully, Kathleen opened her bag, selecting several packets of dried herbs. "He has an infection in his lungs," she explained. "I can make a tea that will help reduce the fever and ease his breathing. It won't cure him immediately, but it should help his body fight the infection." While she worked, Quinn spoke quietly with Martha, learning more about the town and its current circumstances. Minersville had been prosperous once, but the easiest gold was gone now, leaving a community of stubborn holdouts and those too poor to move on. "The doctor left because there weren't enough paying patients," Martha explained. "Most folks just trade for what they need these days." Kathleen administered the first dose of medicine to the boy, who swallowed it with a grimace but no protest, too weak to complain. "He'll need this every 4 hours," she instructed Martha, "and these compresses on his chest and back." She demonstrated the proper placement of the herbal poultices she'd prepared. "I don't know how to thank you," Martha said, tears forming in her eyes. "We don't have much money, but do you have a garden?" Kathleen interrupted gently. "Yes, a small one. Why, fresh vegetables would be payment enough," Kathleen assured her. "We've been traveling and could use them." Relief washed over Martha's face. "Of course, I'll gather some right away." While Martha collected vegetables from her garden, Kathleen left additional doses of medicine with careful instructions for their use. The boy had already fallen into a more peaceful sleep, his breathing slightly less labored. "You're good with children," Quinn observed as they prepared to leave. "I've had practice," Kathleen replied. "In Pahrump, the mothers would bring their children to me in secret, usually after the town doctor had given up or charged more than they could afford. They were just mounting their horses, Martha's generous payment of fresh vegetables safely stowed in their packs, when a commotion further up the street caught their attention. A group of men on horseback had entered the town, dust-covered and trail-worn. One of them was showing something to the locals gathered outside the saloon. Quinn tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. "We should go. Now." They urged their horses down a side street, avoiding the main road out of town. Behind them, they could hear voices rising, questions being called out. "Did they see us?" Kathleen asked as they cleared the last houses and entered the cover of trees beyond. "I don't think so," Quinn replied, though his expression remained tense. "But I'd bet my last dollar those were bounty hunters showing wanted posters. Sheriff Layton must have put a price on our heads." They rode hard for several hours, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Minersville. Only when they reached a small stream in a well-protected valley did they finally stop to rest the horses and consider their situation. "This complicates things," Quinn admitted, filling their canteens from the clear water. "If there are posters circulating, we'll need to be more careful about towns and settlements." "How much farther to the Sacramento Valley?" Kathleen asked, studying their map. "3 days, maybe 4 if we avoid the main trails." Quinn traced the route with his finger. "We need to cross the mountains here, then it's relatively easy travel to the valley." That evening, as they made camp in a small clearing, Kathleen found herself thinking about the boy in Minersville. Despite the danger their brief stop had exposed them to, she couldn't regret helping him. "What are you thinking?" Quinn asked, noticing her pensive expression as he returned from tending the horses. "About the Collins boy," she admitted, "and about what it might be like to practice healing openly again without fear." Quinn sat beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "That's what California will be for us," he promised. "A fresh start, no one knowing our past or carrying old prejudices." "I hope so." Kathleen leaned into him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I've almost forgotten what it feels like to be welcomed rather than feared." "The people who matter will welcome you," Quinn assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple, "and the rest can go to hell." She laughed softly at his bluntness. "Such language, Mr. Pearson. Apologies, Miss Avery." His arm slipped around her waist. "I get protective when it comes to you." They sat together as darkness fell, the simple companionship between them deepening with each day of shared journey. Later, as they lay side by side beneath the stars, Quinn's arms around her and his heartbeat steady against her back, Kathleen allowed herself to believe fully in the future they were pursuing: a home, a healing practice, a life together built on mutual respect and growing love. The mountains presented a new challenge: steep trails, unpredictable weather, and the constant need for vigilance against both natural hazards and human pursuers. But they found beauty there too: alpine meadows filled with wildflowers Kathleen had never seen before, clear streams teeming with fish, forests of pine and sequoia that made Quinn stop in wonder at their majesty. "Have you ever seen anything like it?" he asked, gazing up at a giant sequoia that dwarfed all surrounding trees. "Never," Kathleen admitted, equally awed. "Grandmother spoke of the great trees of California, but I thought she was exaggerating." "If anything, she understated the case," Quinn replied, reaching for her hand. "Makes a man feel small, doesn't it?" "But in a good way," Kathleen decided. "It's humbling but also reassuring somehow. These trees have stood for centuries, through drought and fire and storm. There's something hopeful in that persistence." Quinn smiled, squeezing her hand. "I'm beginning to think you're an incurable optimist beneath all that practical caution, Miss Avery." "Perhaps I'm learning to be," she acknowledged, returning his smile. "I have reason for optimism these days." They crossed the mountains without incident, the eastern slope giving way to rolling foothills, and finally, the vast expanse of the Sacramento Valley spread before them like a promised land. Even from a distance, they could see the richness of it, the fertile soil, the abundant water, the perfect balance of open land for farming and forested areas for timber and game. "It's everything they said it would be," Quinn breathed, taking in the vista. "Where will we go?" Kathleen asked, the possibilities suddenly overwhelming. Quinn pointed to a distant area where the valley floor met the foothills. "There, I think. Good water, protection from winter storms, but still flat enough for decent farmland." They descended into the valley, with a sense of having completed an epic journey, not just the physical distance from Nevada to California, but the greater journey from isolation and danger to the promise of a new beginning. In the small settlement of River Bend, they found a community that welcomed newcomers without asking too many questions. The town was young, established just 5 years earlier, and still growing. When Quinn inquired about available land, they were directed to a homestead about 3 miles from town that had been abandoned when its original owner decided to try his luck in the goldfields further north. "It's a bit rough," the land agent admitted as he showed them the property the next day. "Cabin needs work, and the fields haven't been tended in a year, but the price is fair, and the previous owner did clear about 20 acres before he left." The cabin was indeed rough, a simple one-room structure with a leaking roof and windows that rattled in the slightest breeze. But it had a sound stone fireplace, a well with clean water, and enough land around it to support a small ranch and extensive gardens. "What do you think?" Quinn asked as they walked the property, his expression cautiously hopeful. "It's not much now, but with work." Kathleen turned in a slow circle, taking in the surrounding landscape, the creek that ran along one edge of the property, the gentle slope that would drain well in the rainy season, the mix of oak and pine that provided both shade and building material. But what struck her most was the feeling of the place, a sense of potential, of life waiting to unfold. "It feels right," she said simply, "like we were meant to find it." Quinn's smile was answer enough. They completed the purchase that afternoon. Using most of the money Kathleen had saved over her years in Pahrump, and some Quinn had carefully hidden in his saddlebags. By sunset, they were officially landowners and officially neighbors in the eyes of River Bend, though they had privately decided to delay any public announcement of their true relationship until they were more established. That night, as they sat on the porch steps of their dilapidated cabin sharing a simple meal, Kathleen felt a profound sense of having come home, not to a place she had known before, but to a future she had only dared to dream of in her most private thoughts. "What shall we call it?" she asked, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Quinn considered the question. "What about sanctuary, since that's what it will be for both of us?" "Sanctuary," Kathleen repeated, testing the word. "I like it." The weeks that followed were filled with hard work, repairing the cabin, preparing fields for planting, building corrals for the horses, establishing Kathleen's herb garden. They worked from dawn to dusk most days, falling into bed exhausted but satisfied with their progress. Word spread quickly in River Bend that the new settlers at the old Matthews place included a woman with healing knowledge. It began with Martha Wilson, their nearest neighbor, who asked Kathleen to look at her husband's chronically painful shoulder. When Kathleen's herbal poultice and manipulation techniques brought relief, Martha told her sister, who told the blacksmith's wife, and soon Kathleen found herself with a steady stream of patients. Like in Pahrump, the people of River Bend seemed to accept her skills without suspicion. Perhaps it was the newness of the settlement, the practical frontier mentality that valued results over tradition, or simply the fact that the nearest doctor was in Sacramento, a full day's journey away. Whatever the reason, Kathleen's practice grew, with patients offering payment in everything from eggs and butter to carpentry work on their cabin. Quinn, meanwhile, focused on making the land productive. He repaired fences, cleared additional acreage, and acquired a small herd of cattle through a favorable trade with a rancher heading east. His experience from his family's Texas ranch proved invaluable as he established sanctuary as a working farm. By winter, the cabin had been transformed, the roof repaired, the walls properly chinked against the cold, new windows and a door that actually latched installed. Inside, Kathleen had created a warm home with simple furniture acquired through trade and decorated with dried flowers and herbs from her thriving garden. They celebrated Christmas quietly together, exchanging modest gifts before sharing a special dinner with neighbors who had become friends. As they sat before the fire that evening, Quinn pulled a small package from his pocket. "I have one more gift," he said, suddenly seeming uncharacteristically nervous. Kathleen unwrapped the paper to find a simple gold band. She looked up at Quinn, her heart quickening. "I know we've been living as, well, not exactly husband and wife in the eyes of the community," he began, taking her hand. "But I was hoping you might consider making it official, if you're ready." Tears pricked at Kathleen's eyes as she looked at the ring, then at the man who had changed her life so completely in just a few short months. "I would be honored to be your wife, Quinn Pearson," she said softly. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into an embrace that expressed everything words could not: gratitude, joy, and a love that had grown steadily from the most unlikely of beginnings. They were married in River Bend's small church the following Sunday, a simple ceremony attended by the neighbors and friends they'd made since arriving. No one there knew their full story: the accusations of witchcraft, the jailbreak, the desperate flight across the desert. To the people of River Bend, they were simply Quinn and Kathleen, the hard-working newcomers who had breathed new life into an abandoned homestead. But as they spoke their vows, Kathleen thought of the journey that had brought them to this moment, how a wounded stranger had stumbled into her cabin, and in seeking healing for his body, had somehow healed her soul as well. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared, and as Quinn's lips met hers in their first kiss as a married couple, Kathleen felt the last shadows of her past life fade away, replaced by the brightness of a future built on trust, respect, and love. Spring brought new growth to sanctuary fields green with promising crops, calves frolicking alongside their mothers, and Kathleen's garden bursting with medicinal herbs and vegetables. It also brought news that made them both pause one evening as they sat on their expanded porch, watching the sunset. "Quinn," Kathleen said, her hand resting lightly on her stomach, "I believe we may need to add a room to the cabin before winter." It took him a moment to understand her meaning, but when he did, his face transformed with a joy so pure it brought tears to Kathleen's eyes. "A baby," he whispered, as if saying it too loudly might make the miracle disappear. She nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. Quinn gathered her gently into his arms, his hand covering hers where it rested on her still flat abdomen. "A family," he said in wonder. "Our family." As summer ripened into fall, Kathleen's body changed with the seasons, her belly growing round with new life. Her healing practice continued, though she limited herself to less demanding cases as her pregnancy advanced. The women of River Bend surrounded her with advice and support, a sisterhood she had never experienced in Pahrump. Quinn worked tirelessly, adding a second room to their cabin and building a proper crib from oak he had harvested and seasoned himself. In the evenings, they would sit together planning their future, not just the immediate needs of their expected child, but longer dreams of expanding their land, perhaps adding more children to their family in the years to come. On a crisp December morning, with snow dusting the distant mountains, Kathleen gave birth to a healthy son they named James Quentin Pearson, in honor of both Quinn's father and the friend who had helped make their new life possible. The birth was attended by two experienced mothers from River Bend, who pronounced mother and child perfectly healthy, and the father unnecessarily worried. As Quinn held his son for the first time, his hands gentle around the tiny bundle, Kathleen saw in his face the same wonder she felt that, from all the pain and fear of their past, had come this perfect new beginning. "He's so small," Quinn marveled, a finger tracing the baby's delicate features. "But strong," Kathleen assured him, exhausted but radiant, like his father. That night, with James sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside their bed, Quinn lay beside Kathleen, his arm protectively around her waist. "You ever think about it?" he asked quietly. "Parump the accusations, our escape," Kathleen considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Less often now. It feels like another life, almost like it happened to someone else." "Do you regret leaving?" She turned in his arms to face him. "Never, not for a moment." Her hand came up to caress his cheek, feeling the familiar texture of his skin beneath her fingertips. "How could I regret the journey that brought us here, that brought him to us?" She nodded toward their sleeping son. Quinn's expression softened as he gazed at her. "When I stumbled to your door that day, bleeding and desperate, I thought I was just looking for someone to stitch me up so I could continue my journey." He shook his head in wonder. "I had no idea I was finding my way home." "Home," Kathleen echoed, the word filled with all the meaning they had created together. "That's exactly what this is." Outside, snow began to fall, soft flakes drifting down to blanket their land in quiet beauty. Inside, the small family slept peacefully, secure in the sanctuary they had built not just of logs and stone, but of trust and love and the healing that comes when two wounded souls find in each other exactly what they need to become whole. In the years that followed, sanctuary flourished. The ranch expanded as Quinn acquired additional land. Their herd grew, and their crops thrived in the fertile valley soil. Kathleen's reputation as a healer spread beyond River Bend to surrounding communities, with people traveling considerable distances to seek her expertise. Never again was she called a witch. Instead, she was known as a gifted healer, a loving mother, and a respected member of the community. The knowledge that had once made her an outcast became her greatest contribution to her new home. James grew into a strong, curious boy with his father's determined nature and his mother's compassionate heart. He was joined 2 years later by a sister, Sarah Elizabeth, who from her earliest days showed signs of inheriting her mother's affinity for healing plants. And Quinn and Kathleen's love, born in crisis and tempered by shared struggle, deepened with each passing season into something enduring and unshakable proof that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings can lead to the most beautiful of destinies.